from the etiquette of the student of knowledge and the reality of the pseudo scholar in studies by Sheikh Dr. Saleh bin Fawzan bin Abdullahi Al Fawzan. Now on Amazon, paperback and hardback.
فاسألوا أهل الذكر أي العلماء إن كنتم لا تعلمون. هذا فيه أن الجاهل يسأل أهل العلم ولا يسأل غير أهل العلم من المتعالمين.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I was just thinking, like I'm always doing with regards to the plight of the African Americans. And I was thinking about a point that many white supremacists or whites that have white supremacist leanings, a statement that they always say, well, you sold your own, right? And this reference is with regards to Africans selling other Africans to the Europeans, the Western European nations. So I was thinking about this and was wondering from the brothers and sisters on this channel, how do you respond to that when they say to you, you sold your own? And if you don't acknowledge that, then there's something wrong with you. So how do you respond? What do you say when they say you sold your own? For example, when we study African history, you'll find, like, for example, in present day Nigeria, you'll find that the Fulani at one time enslaved the Hausa like this, right? And we'll also find throughout history the enslavement of various groups. For example, the Europeans, the Western Europeans, same thing. Slavery has always existed. For example, the Vikings enslaved many various European groups. This is just the way of the world, is what they say. How do you respond? How do you respond? Because if you acknowledge that Africans sold other Africans, and it happened, then for some reason in their minds, it lessens what transpired over here. So how do you respond? What do you say? Is there anything to say? These are just thoughts that I personally had with regards to this, I call it rebuttal question, right? Because one of the things they want to do is to downplay the experiences here in the Americas with that, right? And also slavery happened all over the world. So let's get into some of it. And you can leave it in the comment section for those who may get this video afterwards. And we can throw around some thoughts and theories and things of this nature. But the first thing that people have to understand is that Africans, just like any other group on a landmass, just like Aboriginal Australians, just like Native Americans and the likes, are not one monolith. Like, they're not all the same people. Now, with regards to Africans and with regards to Native Americans, they're different people, different ethnic groups, right? For example, in Ethiopia, you had the Somalis, you had the Amhara, you had the Tigrayan, you had the Oromo, right? In Sudan, right? You have the Arabs, you have the Nubians, you have the Nuba, right? You have Fulani that are in the western part of Sudan, what is present day Darfur, right? Not only are these different ethnic groups, they have their own languages, right? Their own cultures, right? So they're not one monolith. And just like Europeans, the Western Europeans, you have Portuguese, Spanish, French, right? English, Germans. They all fought each other, killed each other. Dutch, they all fought each other, killed each other. So in the quest of natural resources, they're going to fight. And guess what? The loser is going to be enslaved, right? So the mindset is, okay, well, we fought you guys. You fought us. We're not the same people. We might share the same skin tone, but we're not the same people. So this is a reality that people have the propensity to not want to analyze, look at. Same with Native Americans, right? The Cherokee, which is the largest Native American group in the United States. I can't say all of the Americas, but I will say the United States. The Cherokee language is vast. Cherokee all over the place. But that's not the only indigenous language. You have the Choctaw. Well, 5 civilized tribes. You have the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, right? The Creek, the Seminoles, right? All got their own language. You have the Crow, and many others, many more. So with that, different cultures, different worldviews. So they're going to fight each other. And although they're all Native Americans, they're not the same people. So this is one way or one means that you can counteract that. That because they sold each other doesn't mean they were one people. They didn't view themselves as one people. Now here in the United States, because of the invention of whiteness, right? The invention of whiteness. White people came into existence somewhere like 1683, 84, 85, something like this. The first time we see whiteness being utilized, right, legally in the when I wouldn't say the United States at that time, but in the colonies, right? This term white. So that term prior to that didn't exist. You were called from your country of origin, meaning if you were Irish, then you were known as William the Irish. Scottish, Scott. British, British. French, French. Africans, we weren't known by the different ethnic groups, right? We weren't known when we came over. We weren't known by the different ethnic groups that we belonged to, right? So you were just called African. All right, those are Africans over there, right? Didn't matter if you were Wolof, Hausa, Fulani, right? From the various Mandingos, right? For example, the Bambara, the Malinki, the Soninki, right? These are groups that we know came to the Americas as slaves, right? Yoruba, right? These are ethnic groups we know without a shadow of a doubt that came to the shores of America. And there are others that I didn't name. But anyway, they weren't one people, but they were forced to become one people, right? They were forced to all be African. They didn't view themselves like that on the continent, right? You Fulani, you Fulani. You Hausa, you Hausa. You Wolof, you Wolof, right? Like this. But here, they were known by the continent as opposed to their ethnic group, right? Which is something that has never happened to the Africans prior to that. Even when we look at Islamic sciences, right? Past and present, right? And we look at the great scholars, for example, a recent scholar who passed in the 90s, he taught in Medina. His name was Sheikh Umar Ibn Muhammad Falata, right? Sheikh Umar Falata, right? Or he was also known as Umar Fulani, rahimahullah ta'ala. He taught in Medina. He taught at Daroda in Medina, right? And he taught tafsir. He was a scholar of fiqh. He was a scholar of hadith, right? But he was known from the ethnic group which he came from, right? And there were some like the great scholar Abdurrahman al-Ifriqi, right? And he utilized that term. But there were other Africans who utilized the name of their ethnic group. Either way, there's nothing wrong with that. But the person who used al-Ifriqi, they still know or knew what ethnic group they came from, right? This is not the case with us here in the United States. Now, however, when we look at slavery in the Caribbean, in Central and South America, those Africans were able to hold on to African traditions a lot better than us here on the mainland, right? It's just a reality. Like, for example, you can still see Yoruba influence in a lot of the Afro-Cuban societal norms, right? A lot of Afro-Cuban music, ways. You see a lot of the ways of the Yoruba in that. You understand what I'm saying? So again, with that reality, what do you say? What do you say? You sold your own. I'm just curious how you respond to European Americans and white Latinos who say to you, you sold your own. Let's put it in the comments section, or if you're watching this live, share your thoughts. But there's one way to counteract that. We were not one monolith. There were multiple ethnic groups from amongst the Africans, many different social norms as well as languages. And we just gave the example of the various groups within each country, right? For example, Nigeria, we mentioned you had the Hausa, you had the Yoruba, you have the Igbo, you have the Fulani, you have the Kanuri, on and on and on. And they all have different languages. Senegal, right? You have the Wolof, right? Amongst the Mandingo, again, you have multiple groups of Mandingo, Bambara, Soninke, Malinke, like this. So if they fought in a war, if they fought against each other, right, and people were captives, then guess what? They're going to put each other in slavery. No different from the Native Americans, no different from Europeans, both Western and Eastern. They all share that, right? So that in and of itself is not a good argument to shut African Americans up with regards to talking about what transpired here in the Americas. Now, with that being said, with regards to you sold your own. Now, what I tell people is that one issue has nothing to do with the other, right? One issue has nothing to do with the other. The Africans had a way of dealing with slaves. Europeans had a way of dealing with slaves, right? But one of the things I tell people is that when we look at slavery throughout the world, and there are various books that talk about slavery, everyone wants to do a comparison contrast and only focus on the things that are like, but they don't want to look at how they're different. One of the things that set American slavery apart from other forms of slavery is the utilization of science, right? Science. I see Malik Muhammad's here. Now, Malik Muhammad, our brother, he is a sociologist, right? I studied sociology, but my field is more broad. It's not psychology or sociology. It's interdisciplinary, human services technology. So I'm mentioning Malik Muhammad because he's a sociologist. And one of the things that, sociology looks at is the overall group, systematic study of groups, right? So in his field, there was a new, I forget the founder of this particular science, it's actually a pseudoscience, but there was a science that evolved out of sociology and anthropology, right? Because like psychology, all three had racist beginnings, right? Well, there's a science that grew out of anthropology and sociology called anthropo-sociology. I forget the founder at the time. But you can look it up. It's not hard to look up. Anthropo-sociology, right? This so-called science was the study of what made Europeans superior. This is the point I'm getting at. Why are we more superior to anyone else on the earth, right? Like this. And you had a whole lot of this race science come into being. You had people like Darwin, right? His cousin Galton. You had Madison Grant. You had Gobineau, right? Like this, right? These guys pushed these racial sciences, right? The study of cranial sizes, right? You're right. They always said Africans had small brains because the cranium wasn't as big. Like little pseudoscience like this, right? But the point that I'm getting at is you guys, and I'm talking about Europeans, created sciences to try to prove the inferiority of Africans, right? Your whole science was based on skin color in conjunction with your superiority. What makes you more superior? So when you get the chance, look it up, anthroposociology. We do not find this when we study slavery any time in history. We don't find this. We don't find it. When politics, in conjunction with science, in conjunction with religion, right? The curse of Ham, right? This is when we find these things coming together to prove what? The inferiority of Africans and others, and the superiority of Europeans. So these are things that set the slavery apart in the different areas of the world, right? Now, if you want to get into, for example, some may say, well, Hanif or Mr. Davis, bro, look, the Greeks conquered each other. They were divided into city-states. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. You had Athens, you had Sparta, right? And on like this, right? They fought each other. They conquered each other. They enslaved each other. No doubt. Sparta was a complete slave society. I get it, right? During King Leonidas' time, you know, they made the movie 300, which that was an actual battle, by the way, the Battle of Thermopylae, right? I don't know what they did with the movie, but anyway, but that was an actual battle. But the point is, the Spartans were warriors, and the slaves took care of the day-to-day stuff, right? But again, as advanced as Greece was, because remember, you had Plato, Socrates, the Stoics, and on coming out of Greece, right? Different mindsets, right? So why come these great philosophers didn't create a science, right, to prove their superiority? Only here in America and Europe did this. You did it with anthropology. You did it with psychology. You did it with history. You did it with sociology. You did it with military might, right? When you study military history, right? Divide and conquer. You join the side of the weakest group, fight against the larger group, and then you're able to take over the group that you joined, and you're able to colonize. Or you'll get factions to fight against each other till they've exhausted all their means, and what? You swoop in. These are realities of what Europeans did. But you don't want to talk about that. You want to focus on the fact that, well, Africans sold Africans. Well, let's look at they call it elasticity, right? Let's look at what the Africans gained, right? Call this elasticity. Let's look at what they've gained as opposed to what they lost, right? When we study what we call the theory of social death, right? Social death, right? This was coined by Dr. Orlando Patterson, right? He wrote a nice book on social death and slavery. Book about that thick book. And he discusses slavery all over the world. And he was what we call a historical sociologist. Yeah, that's a thing. Historical sociologist. Malik Muhammad is there. He can tell you whether or not it's a thing. But anyway, he coined social death because he focused on what slaves lost while being enslaved, right? So now this new theory of elasticity seeks to do away with social death, right? But the reality is, when we delve into psychology and sociology, you have to look at the effects of things. You have to look at the effects. So if the effects have negative repercussions, right? If the effects have negative repercussions, you have to acknowledge that. Now, you can deny it, as Dr. Amos Wilson always points out, you know, when we discuss these issues with regards to Europeans accepting the realities of what slavery did to the Africans, right? He said they always want to distort, deny, and then project, right? And so when you hear someone say, you enslaved your own, right? This is a form of projection, right? Because the fact that Africans sold their own still has nothing to do with the reality of the treatment that Africans got in the United States, right? It's like apples and oranges. right? They're both fruit, but they're different. Orange is not an apple, apple's not an orange. Common sense things like this, right? So in saying this, I'm just curious as to what do you guys think when someone says you sold your own? What do you think? How do you respond? These are some of the things that I use to respond. Africans aren't one monolith. Amongst Africans, you have different ethnic groups, different histories, different languages, different social norms, right? Then you have ethnic groups that grew out of two ethnic groups because the ethnic groups mixed, right? For example, like the Fulani, right? I mentioned the Fulani earlier. There's so many different groups of Fulani. You got the Wadabi, you got the Fulfulde, you got the Pool, the Fular. That's just Fulani, right? That's just Fulani. We ain't even gotten to the other groups, right? That's just the Fulani. Then you have different groups from amongst just what we call Nilotes, right? The Nilotes in Sudan, right? Nilotes in Sudan, Rwanda, like this, right? The Dinka, right? These are Nilotes. The Shilluk, the Nuer, right? All of them in South Sudan, right? All in South Sudan. Different languages, by the way. The Dinka and the Shilluk, they fought each other, they put each other in slavery. No doubt about it. But what does that slavery have to do with the slavery here? What does any of that have to do with your creation of sciences, right? Your sciences that you created. Eugenics, anthroposociology, right? You created these sciences so that what? Africans can stay in their place. And these things were endorsed a long time. And many of the theories that were utilized then, you don't hear them now, but the reality of them are still prevalent, right? The reality of those old theories are still prevalent from those race sciences, right? From the studies of Galton, right? The works of Galton, Darwin's cousin, right? Eugenics, right? At one point, whites were divided, and I say this on a couple of podcasts before. Whites were divided into three distinct races, right? This further proves my point with regards to the sciences that you created to prove your superiority and black and indigenous inferiority, right? Whites were divided into three races. They were divided into the Nordic, right? Then you had the Alpine, and then you had the Mediterranean, right? And then there was a hierarchy of the three. The Nordic, they the cream of the crop. And in many cases, the Nordic were your Western European. Alpine, Eastern European, right? And then you had the Mediterranean. They were the lowest. They're still considered white, but they're the lowest. Why? Because their skin was a little swarthy. That was the term that they used back then. Swarthy, meaning you're a little dark. You got a little olive color going on. You got a little brown coloring going on. And so you probably got some of them Africans mixed with you, which is one of the reasons why when you study American history, the Italians weren't considered white because of their close proximity to what? Africa. The Greeks weren't considered white because of their close proximity to what? Africa. And we know Africans mixed with Italians and Greeks. Matter of fact, that was all the Roman Empire at one time. And the Roman Empire stretched all the way into North Africa. So you had Berbers and dark-skinned Africans. That was part of the Roman Empire, right? And you had African Roman emperors, such as Macrobus, right? And then you had Septimius Severus, right? Which one of my favorite Roman emperors when you studied Roman history. And then, you had the Severus dynasty coming out of it. Mark Antony, he's a descendant of that Severus dynasty, right? Like this. But the point I'm getting at is anybody that's white from those areas, they were viewed as Mediterraneans, because Mediterranean Sea there, of course. So they were the lowest of the low. So what do we see today in the United States, though? What do we see? We see Arabs that are white, right? The Arabs, they joined the white club. Mexicans are white. Armenians are white. The Italians are now white, right? People who weren't considered white at one time, now they're white, right? Indians, I'm talking about Asian Indians, are white. They're considered white. They went to court for it as well. I shared some of the videos on this group, Black American Muslim Opinion. right? So, although those theories are no longer in existence, the behavior of the people keep the what? The theories alive. It's because no one mentions the theory anymore doesn't mean that the mindset of the theories of old aren't still prevalent, right? That's just a reality. This is how it is. So this is another means of getting at those who say, well, you sold your own. You sold your own. As to downplay, right? As to downplay what happened to the African Americans throughout the diaspora, right? So again, how do you brothers and sisters respond? You know, so I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I was just thinking about it because that's been going on a lot. Oh, well, Africans sold each other. And, you know, we're already seeing in Florida, and always remember this, when something goes on in another state, be mindful that that thing that's happening in another state, be mindful that it can happen in the state that you reside in. So we see Florida trying to change history, right? We see that. Oh, blacks acquired skills that they could use later on in life. Just like the lost cause myth, right? Right after slavery, the lost cause myth, that came from a novel. I forget the author. The name of the book, though, was called Leopard Spots, right? Leopard Spots, right? And Abu Barad, this book was required reading in 1913 in your state. At one point, Harriet Beecher Stowe, her book was required reading, right? Uncle Tom's Cabin. Good book, by the way. Both of her books were good. Dread and Uncle Tom's Cabin. But anyway, Uncle Tom's Cabin was required reading in the state of New York. They killed that. When Leopard Spot came out. Leopard Spot is the first book that pushed the mindset or pushed the propaganda that Africans or blacks were what? Contented slaves. They were happy, jovial, right? This was the claim in Leopard Spots. So Leopard Spot removed Harriet Beecher Stowe book as required reading in the educational system in New York in 1913. I believe it was 1913. If I'm off, it got to be between 1913 and 1915. No doubt about that. But anyway, you use your politics and your educational system also to keep people what? Subjugated. How was that like the enslavement in Africa? How was that like the enslavement of Native Americans enslaving each other in the Americas? Is anything like European? You want to focus on slavery was everywhere. Okay, how were they the same? What made them different? Right? What made them different? You have to, when we look at these things, don't be fooled by Thomas Sowell. Well, let's look at the similarities and let's look at how they are alike. Okay, Thomas Sowell, let's do that. But let's look at the contrast too. For example, E. Franklin Frazier, right? The one who wrote The Black Bourgeois, right? The Black Bourgeoisie, right? Sociologist, E. Franklin Frazier. He did a study on Brazil, right? He was trying to ascertain how is it that Brazil, the black and white population, not saying there's no problems, but for the most part, how is it that the black and white population get along better than in the United States? They were both slave societies at one time. So how are they alike? So he went to study. Okay, they were both slave societies. But in his study, he found some differences, right? Some of the differences he found was the plantations, right? The plantations. In the United States, the plantations were closer together, right? They were closer together. But in Brazil, they were further apart, miles apart, right? This plays a role in what? This plays a role when you got plantations close together. This plays a role in keeping the slave population in check. For example, I'm here in North Carolina. One of the towns I work in multiple towns throughout this area of North Carolina, I'm in. But one of the towns that I work in is a town called Hillsborough, North Carolina. That is the capital of Orange County. I live in Durham. I'm in Durham, but the county is also called Durham. Next door is Orange County. That's what Chapel Hill is. But the capital of Orange County is not Chapel Hill, even though UNC Chapel Hill gets all the notoriety. The capital of Orange County is Hillsborough. Now, when you go into the downtown area of Hillsborough, North Carolina, if you keep straight down 86, going to another county called Caswell, you will see at least 3 or 4 plantations before you exit Hillsborough. You'll see 4 of them. So this is an example of the close proximity that plantations were. And I'm here in North Carolina. You see plantation houses all the time. People are refurbishing plantation houses. They even refurbishing the slave quarters here in North Carolina, right? So, and then you see one, and then maybe half a mile, you see another one, right? And plantation houses, they differed in sizes and things of that nature. But anyway, so this is some of the things that E. Franklin Frazier looked at. Oh, okay. So that's going to play a role in controlling the slave population. Another thing he looked at is slave revolts. We really didn't have any successful slave revolts. Many historians say you didn't have any. I take the position that we had one. If you study John Horse, right, down in Florida, John Horse. John Horse was half Seminole, half African, right? He took over the Seminoles after Osceola. Almost forgot his name. Osceola. Osceola was the chief of the Seminoles. He died in captivity. John Horse was with him. John Horse escaped. Him and his crew, they escaped. Osceola, he died. John Horse became the leader. John Horse successfully led runaway slaves from Florida all the way to Mexico, the Muskogee. They call them Muskogee Seminoles, right? The Black Seminoles, right? And when we studied the Black Seminole War, or another name, the Gullah Wars, why? Because the Gullah Geechee are also Black Seminoles, right? When we said that lasted 99 years, and there was 3 of them. 3 of them, right? So John Horse was victorious, in that. But anyway, so that's just my little rant. Because we didn't have any success. Yeah, we did. We had John Horse. But anyway. But the point is, majority of the slave revolts were not successful. However, Brazil, it's a different story. There were many successful ones. So that's a difference right there. Another thing that E. Franklin Frazier noticed was that in the United States, they had an issue of mixed race children, right? We call them mulattoes here. They call them mulattoes. I'm not going to say we. They call them mulattoes, right? Because it comes from the term mule, right? Because they believe that the mulattoes are born degenerate. Just like when you cross a horse and a donkey, you create a mule, right? But the mule is sterile. The mule can't have offspring, right? However, the mule is stronger than both the horse and the donkey, which is why people mix them together. But anyway, that was the mindset. This is the term mulatto comes from that. So with that, here in the mainland, in the northern part of the mainland, they believe that there's a deficiency in these biracial children. That wasn't the mindset in Brazil, as E. Franklin Frazier noticed. He saw that the slave owners felt that the children that came out of this union got the best of both worlds, because the European were the smart ones, right? They knew how to run government. They knew how to operate infrastructure. But the Africans were hard workers. They were strong. So you're combining both traits. So the Portuguese viewed it differently than their British counterparts, than their French counterparts, right? So that's a difference. And that's going to play a role in the psychosocial dynamics of the two groups as time goes on, right? So these are things that E. Franklin Frazier found that was different. And there are others, but for the sake of brevity, I'll end it there. But the point I'm bringing is that when they talk like this, then you have to look at the similarities, but you also have to look at the differences, right? Like somebody said, why is it that the few Haitians that come here, why are they successful and African Americans aren't successful? But first off, the Haitians kicked behind, right? They got their independence in 1804. Now, Haiti is still poor, no doubt about that. And we know the Europeans are behind that, no doubt about that. But the reality is, though, is that they were free in 1804. Not only that, they were the majority in the country. Haitians, black folks, people of African descent from the diaspora, they are the majority. They were the majority. That's not the case here. After emancipation, you're still the minority, right? After emancipation, you're still the minority, right? Not only that, after emancipation, did the discrimination stop? Did the discrimination stop? No, it didn't stop. Matter of fact, African Americans got put right back into slavery, right? They got put right back into slavery, right? Jim Crow, right? Peonage, right? What we call sharecropping. That was the peonage system, what they call debt peonage. It's a form of slavery utilized in debt, right? And you had convict leasing, right? So it kept going because Reconstruction was a disaster. That's a whole nother issue when we start getting into Reconstruction. It's a whole nother issue. We can do series just on why Reconstruction failed, right? But anyway, but the point I'm getting at is we have to utilize these realities to counteract it. And then after we counteract it, man, don't go back and forth with these people. Don't go back and forth with these people. You know, when people have biases, right? People have biases, you know, they're going to stick to their biases, right? I don't care what data you bring, they're going to stick to their biases, right? They don't care about the effects that slavery had on African Americans. They don't care about the effects that discrimination had on African Americans. I can go on and on from a psychological standpoint. I can go on and on how racism not only affects the psychology, but it also affects the physiology, the physical body. People have ailments as a result of racism. Theories such as racial battle fatigue, right, by Dr. Smith, right? Black fatigue by Dr. Francis Winters. Post-traumatic slave syndrome by Dr. DeGroy Leary. John Henryism by Dr. James, right? All of these theories, they all have something in common when we study those theories, and that's the effect that it has on the human body. And we ain't even got into the psychological, the internalization of racism, what it does to the individual, right? Which prompted the Clarks, right? In 1947, it prompted the Clarks, right? Sociologists again. It prompted them to do what? The doll study, right? Why do these black kids keep picking these white dolls? And they did the study again sometime in the 2000s, I think the early 2000s, right? Kids still picking white dolls. Why you internalize it? No one wants to talk about that, right? Even if you utilize European theories, right? Stockholm syndrome, inferiority complex, right? Inferiority complex, Adler, right? He coined that. One of my favorite when you start delving into psychoanalyst theory, right? A lot of people like Freud, I like Adler. But anyway, that's my rant. But anyway, he coined that. But anyway, you see this amongst what? African Americans, right? But when we bring these realities to the people, it's, oh, no, man, y'all always want to play the victim. Again, projection. Proving Dr. Amos Wilson right. So again, you know, I'll end, man. I'm going on a rant. But these are some of my counter arguments that I use with regards to dealing with that statement. Africans sold their own. How do you respond? But I will say this. If you want to respond, make sure you are well abreast to history, psychology, sociology, anthropology, political science. Make sure you have some knowledge of these things and the effects that these things had on our people. It will allow you to be able to discuss it, right? Whether in a private setting or a public setting. So with that, you know, I'll end and inshallah, just put in the comments of this video what you guys think with regards to that. Let's get a conversation jumping off, inshallah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.